In this video, we're going to look at how my dual spinner vertical Melty Brain RUD performed at my local club's biggest event of the year. Now, a quick warning before we jump into this does not go particularly well. What we're about to see is part of the reason why I have simplified my Melty designs and built a simpler version very recently. Before we jump into these fights, I put some cleats on RUD to start this event. We had a brand new MDF floor for the event, and I was given permission to run the cleats as a trial to see how badly they damaged the floor, and effectively if they damaged the floor too much, this would be the only time I was ever allowed to run them. I'd built the cleats in the past and hadn't actually used them in competition yet, so this was the chance to do that. ARC runs these events all very similarly, so we are doing a round robin group, and then if you win enough fights in your round robin group, you make it through into a bracket where you play off for first place. So we're going to start off our bracket with Ursa, another twin vert, but this time a more traditional twin vert with small little drums at the end of a large chassis.
3, 2, 1, fight.
Big thank you to ARC for the footage for this and all of the rest of the fights. I'm going to leave a link to the ARC YouTube channel down below. The club is actually starting to film more and more of our events and putting them up on that channel. So if you want to watch all of these fights probably earlier than I'm going to get out fight reports for them, that is where to go. Again, there'll be a link in the description down below. Back to this actual fight though, I believe that the builder here, this was their first beetle weight or one of their early beetle weight designs, and they did a pretty good job of having it actually tank hits from the Melty. There was only really one shot in there where I got bounced off a wall and straight back into them where I actually did a significant chunk of damage, and even then that was to a armor panel that was designed to break, or at least designed to be replaceable so that if it broke in fights, it wasn't a huge deal to fix. At least that is my memory of how those parts all slot together on that robot. The interesting thing for me here though is that my translation was garbage. It was absolutely terrible. I was getting very, very minor swaying out of the robot, and this was the same electronic stack up, the same basic shape and everything that I'd run previously. The only real difference here was the cleats, and I think part of that is the reason, or that is partially the reason why this was having so much trouble. Cleats may be the magnets of plywood, but I think on a softer wood like MDF, they just scratch through the floor and don't get that significant traction. This, of course, led to some kind of annoying moments in this fight where I was effectively a sitting duck being like hockey pucked around the arena here, there, and everywhere. As mentioned, it did lead to one good shot where I actually got some good damage on, but realistically, that's not my damage. That's him damaging himself with me as an arena hazard more than anything else. So that really wasn't good, and of course it led to the logical end of this fight where he finally gets the right shot to bank me off the walls into one of the two open pits, because of course ARC runs pits that randomly drop in, I think, the last 2 minutes of the fight. And yeah, in this particular case where I couldn't really translate all that well, it was just a matter of time before he dropped me down the pit, especially as the actual collisions between us, he was doing a good job of keeping weapon to my whole robot. That did mean that his belt kind of got slipped and tangled up a little bit, so his weapons did go down partway through that fight somewhere, but it didn't actually make a whole lot of difference because he still had all of that steel up the front to tank those hits from the Melty Brain. And yeah, realistically, this wasn't hitting anywhere near as hard as it possibly can, or possibly should, really. So of course, we lose that fight, and that is the first of our 3 fights in this round robin, so a loss is not really a good start here. Next up, we are fighting a robot called Scale. This is an Omni-Drive drum built by James of Broken Link Robotics. I will leave a link to his channel down below as well. We fought this robot in the past. The last time we fought this, we fought it with an undercutter, and we did quite well. So let's see how the Melty Brain fares.
3, 2, 1, fight.
So again, that was not a particularly good fight from RUD's perspective. I was still running the cleats because at that point I hadn't quite put together that the cleats were the thing that were causing the issues here. And so I couldn't translate again. He tried to box rush, he thankfully missed that box rush. He still got a little hit on, and for whatever reason, that powered down the robot and like caused the code to just hit an error state, and I'm really not sure how or why that happens. But I was very lucky in the fact that that same hit also forced him upside down, which meant that his movement was also quite slow. So that gave me all the time I needed to spin the whole robot down, flick a couple of switches on my controller, get everything back up and running, and get the Melty going again. With the Melty back up and running, I was able to translate a little bit. Again, because of the cleats, it didn't really work particularly well, but I did actually manage to veer towards him as he came towards me, which I would say shows some level of controlled movement, despite the fact that this is very, very not controlled movement that, well, at least compared to what this thing should be able to do, all things going well. It still was enough to get a good hit on him. Thankfully, in this particular instance, it didn't get flipped back over and he got pushed over towards the pit. But at the same time, I was throwing a wheel, mostly due to bolts that were just too short for this particular application. I'd put Loctite on them and everything, but they just did not have enough thread engagement into the motors for the YOLO drive to hold onto the wheel, especially when this entire robot is spinning and all of that energy is trying to force those wheels off the motor. It is a lot, and if I'm not careful, I lose wheels exactly like I did in this fight. Unfortunately, at the end of the fight, there's not much more to say, really. He manages to pit escape, he hits back into me, even though I've got one wheel. One wheel, of course, meant that the translation got even worse because the code wasn't really set up for one wheel-based translation. Thankfully, it was still able to keep a heading track and I was still able to do a little bit, but again, it's not super controlled movement. It's enough to stay in the fight, but it's not really enough for me to like chase him down and make hits. So he did the chasing down, he hit us, he flipped himself back over, and of course at that point it was basically game over because I was spinning, I was getting a little bit of translation, but much like the first fight, I was kind of a sitting duck waiting for him to bounce me off a wall and into the pit, which is exactly what happened. At this point in the competition, it is the end of day one. I've had 2 of my 3 round robin fights, and it's really not looking good at 2 losses. So overnight between the 2 days, I decided to swap out the cleats and put back on some cast urethane tires because those have worked better for me in the past. And in actual fact, they do seem to work a little bit better. In testing on day 2, the robot spins up, the robot translates a lot better, or at least is moving faster across the floor. So I was fairly happy with that, and I was glad that we had a little bit more translation because our next fight is up against Harbinger, a very nasty, large vertical spinner.
3, 2, 1, fight.
Oh no. Oh no. So we ejected a wheel again. It turns out that when I swapped the wheels over, I didn't put the long bolts in, I put the short bolts in, and that caused that issue to raise its ugly head once again. Thankfully from here, I put long bolts into the wheels so that we didn't have this issue from this point forward, but of course it was an issue in this fight. And again, on one wheel, while the robot can translate, it's not really set up for that, and it does cause some issues, especially when you get punched really, really hard by a very big vertical spinner and flipped over and teetering on the edge of the pit with only one wheel, which was spinning free in the air, high-siding us and causing us to lose that fight really quickly. It was again the pit in this arena, but not the way it was in the first 2 fights. Melty brains and pits don't particularly like each other all that much, or well, I shouldn't say that. Melty brains don't like pits. Pits like melty brains, and that is a bit of a problem. Especially when I fight in an arena with a pit. Here's the thing, I know I'm fighting in an arena with a pit. I should build things that work better with pits in play, but I like the chaos of a melty brain, and so here we are doing this. Eventually I will get a melty brain back into an arena where there is no pit, and I'll have a bit more fun in those fights. But look, I'm still having fun in these fights, well, some of them anyway. When the robot is working better because it's like actually able to translate and things, I have fun even if I end up in the pit. The other good thing about this is that this is done for a massive crowd. We run these fights at Havoc at a really big science festival, and all of the sides of the arena are packed full of people, and it is great to hear people's reaction to the whole robot spinning up and then the heading lights displaying and stuff. People get really into robots like this, even when I do silly things like get thrown down the pit. So, you know, I am more than happy to keep building and fighting this style of robot in an arena with pits, because look, sometimes you just want more chaos. Speaking of more chaos, we are completely out of the tournament. There is no way our 3 losses are making it through into the tournament off the round robin. So instead, we are going to go for a grudge match. James, the builder of Scale, also brought a ton of other robots to Havoc, and so we grudged one of the rest of those. This is Subdivide. It is an overhead saw type robot.
3, 2, 1, fight.
Okay, well that was kind of bad, but not as bad as it looked, thankfully. So again, James here tried to box rush us. He missed the box rush on the first run through, but on the second run through, we weren't up to speed enough, and he managed to scoop us up in his nice big claws and push us over into the wall, getting that first deadly hammer blow in. Thankfully, that hammer blow didn't actually make it all the way through the 6mm HDPE top plate that I have on this robot. It got a decent amount through the plastic, but not so much that it actually caused any real issues in anything. The problem happened when he flipped the robot over, or well, when the robot was flipped over from that shot, and he put another one into the underbelly. This one was much more of a problem because it did actually just pierce through the 6mm HDPE. Unfortunately, right where it pierced through is the PCB. I think he did actually touch the PCB, although there is no real marking on the back of it. But for whatever reason, at that point, things started shutting down, and the robot really didn't work particularly well anymore. I mean, the other thing here is that with the extra pieces of plastic, the robot technically can spin upside down right now, even though there is a bit of a dag of plastic hanging up, but it cannot spin right way up right now. This shot into the underbelly has created a tooth of plastic that is so tall that one side works and the other side does not. This side over here is just not touching the ground right now, which really wouldn't have helped if I'd managed to get back upright and start translating again. However, yeah, that wasn't happening at all. For whatever reason, one of those shocks shook something inside, and I could not get the robot back up and running and translating again, which is a bit of a problem. This is and was running the old electronics and code that I have for my Melty brain. I also had a problem with the code at the end of the first fight. It was in the pit, it was showing the red LED saying that it was disconnected from my transmitter, but the motors were moving, and there should be no case where that can happen in the code I had running. So I put that down to some form of fault in the actual electronics themselves. I think the ESCs saw something that they weren't supposed to see, potentially some kind of signal interference down the lines potentially. So there's something in there that I probably want to shield all my cabling in my new versions of Melty Brains, just to kind of make sure none of that weirdness ever happens again. But also, again, this is the old electronics and the old code, and I really am keen to move over to the new stuff running the accelerometer and the more powerful Teensy to hopefully fix all of those issues in one go, basically. Yeah. So as mentioned, not a great story today, or well, a good story, but not a winning story here today, as we just had issue on issue on issue for this particular event. And again, this is part of the reason I've gone over to a simpler Melty Brain style. I want to get my Melty Brains translating and moving a little bit better, and get that code really dialed in before I slap weapons back on the outside. The other thing here is that James also provided me a little bit of slow-mo footage, and the slow-mo footage seems to suggest that the motors aren't spinning quite as well as they possibly could, so it looks like the next version that has weapons probably wants to have some form of hub motor design, just so that there's a bit more reliability in the systems, because there is a issue with the belt tension on the edges here. These two belts tension slightly differently, which causes the motors to spin up at different speeds, which causes issues when you're trying to spin the entire robot as quickly as possible and not have gyroscopic force issues coming off of your weapons, which are spinning at wildly different speeds, or at least trying to spin at wildly different speeds. Anyway, lots and lots of learning that has come from this particular event, and lots of stuff that I'm going to be working on going forwards. But again, we're going to slow down, we're going to take things simple, and we're going to kind of build back up to a weaponized Melty sometime next year. Anyway, that has been it for this video. I hope you have enjoyed that one, and I will see you in the next video.